In this raw, unflinching memoir set in 1960s Pennsylvania, Elena Martinez recounts her harrowing childhood of systematic sexual abuse by her father and brother, enabled by her mother's willful silence. Through meticulous documentation and years of careful planning, she transforms from helpless victim to calculated avenger, uncovering a devastating family secret that changes everything she thought she knew about her past. This is not just a story of survival, but of a young woman who refused to let evil triumph and whose courage to seek justice would ultimately save countless other children from the same fate. A story of trauma transformed into purpose, silence broken into truth, and how one person's refusal to remain a victim can create ripples of justice that last for decades. My hands are trembling as I turn the brass key in the front door lock for the last time. Not from cold, though this March afternoon in Willow Creek carries the bite of lingering winter, but from the weight of 35 years of memories pressing against my chest like a physical force. I am Elena Martinez Hayes, and I am 47 years old. I have returned to 1247 Elm Street, the house where I grew up, the house where unspeakable things happened behind closed doors, for one final visit before the demolition crew arrives tomorrow morning. The floorboards still creak in exactly the same places they did when I was a terrified child, trying to navigate them silently in the dark. Each groan of aged wood under my feet sends a shiver through my body, not just because of the memories, but because these sounds were once my early warning system, the only thing that sometimes saved me from encountering the monsters who shared my home. The house smells of dust and decay now. Dust motes dancing in the afternoon light streaming through bare windows like tiny spirits finally being released from captivity. That's exactly what they are. I realize the remnants of years of suffering and silence now free to float away into nothingness. The silence in these empty rooms is profound, but it's not the same terrifying silence I once knew. This is the silence of endings of justice, served of secrets, finally exposed to the cleansing light of truth. I'm here because I need closure before this place is erased from the earth forever. But more than that, I'm here because this story, my story, needs to be told completely and honestly, not just the sanitized version that appeared in newspaper headlines and court transcripts. This is the real story of how a little girl learned that the greatest monsters don't hide under beds or in dark closets. They sit at dinner tables, help with homework, and teach Sunday school. They are trusted, respected members of the community who smile for photographs while destroying lives behind closed doors. But this is also the story of how that little girl grew up to become their worst nightmare, not through violence or vigilante justice, but through something far more powerful, the truth methodically documented and strategically revealed. My revenge wasn't swift or dramatic. It was patient, thorough, and absolutely devastating. And it didn't end with prison sentences. It started there. Standing in this empty house now, I can feel the ghost of my younger self in every corner, the frightened child who had nowhere to run, no one to trust, no voice that anyone would hear. But I can also feel the strength I discovered within that child, the iron will that carried me through years of careful planning and ultimately brought down not just my abusers, but an entire network of predators who thought they were untouchable. This is how I destroyed them. This is how I made sure they could never hurt another child. And this is how one person's refusal to remain silent can echo through decades, saving lives in ways you might never imagine. Willow Creek, Pennsylvania in 1963 was the kind of place where everyone went to the same church, shopped at the same stores, and knew their neighbor's business, or thought they did. The town nestled in a valley where the Susquehanna River curved lazily through farmland and forests, a postcard-perfect slice of small-town America, with a population that hovered just above 4,000 souls. I was born Elena Maria Martinez on February 18, 1952. the second child and only daughter of Roberto and Carmen Martinez. My earliest memories are of laughter and safety, my father tossing me high in the air while I shrieked with delight, my mother humming Spanish lullabies as she braided my long dark hair into intricate patterns. These memories feel almost foreign now, like scenes from someone else's life, but they were real. There was a time when my father was truly my protector, when my mother's eyes held warmth instead of vacant fear. Our house on Elm Street was a modest two-story colonial built in the 1920s with white clapboard siding and green shutters that my mother repainted every spring. It had 4 bedrooms upstairs, my parents' room at the end of the hall, my brother Miguel's room next to theirs, my room across the hall from Miguel's, and a small guest room that was always kept pristine for relatives who rarely visited. The walls were thin, so thin that normal conversation in one room could be heard clearly in the next. This architectural flaw would become both a curse and eventually a crucial element in my survival. My father, Roberto Martinez, had immigrated from Puerto Rico in 1955 at the age of 22, drawn by promises of factory work and the American dream. He was a big man, 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that spoke of physical labor and a booming laugh that could fill a room. He found work at the Bethlehem steel plant 40 minutes away in Steelton, but his real dream was to own his own business. In 1960, he used his savings to buy Murphy's failing auto repair shop on Main Street, renaming it Martinez Motors. The shop thrived under my father's skilled hands and personable nature. He could diagnose engine problems by sound alone and had a gift for explaining complex mechanical issues in terms that made sense to his customers. By 1963, he employed 3 other mechanics and had built a reputation as the most honest auto repair shop in the county. The local newspaper even did a feature story on him in 1964, calling him a shining example of immigrant success and American opportunity. But there were signs even then that something dark lurked beneath his public persona. I remember overhearing arguments between my parents late at night, sharp-hushed conversations in rapid Spanish that would end abruptly when they realized I might be listening. I remember the way my mother would flinch when he moved too quickly, the careful way she served his dinner to avoid spilling anything, the bruises on her arms that she explained away as clumsiness. "Your mother is very clumsy," my father would say with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes, ruffling my hair as I stared at the fingerprint-shaped marks on her wrists. "Always walking into doors, falling downstairs. Good thing she has me to take care of her, mija?" My mother, Carmen, was 24 when I was born, a quiet woman with prematurely silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She had grown up in Willow Creek, the daughter of second-generation Mexican immigrants who had assimilated so completely into American culture that Spanish was rarely spoken in their home. She met my father at a church social in 1956 and married him after a whirlwind 6-month courtship. Carmen was an exceptional housekeeper and cook, known throughout the neighborhood for her perfect garden and her ability to stretch a dollar until it screamed. She canned vegetables, baked bread from scratch, and maintained our home with military precision. But even as a very young child, I sensed a sadness in her that she tried to hide behind busy work and forced smiles. She had a habit of humming while she worked old songs in Spanish that her grandmother had taught her. But sometimes the humming would stop abruptly, and I would find her standing frozen at the kitchen sink or the ironing board, staring at nothing, with tears sliding silently down her cheeks. When I asked what was wrong, she would quickly wipe her face and force a bright smile. "Nothing, mija. Mama is just tired. Why don't you go play outside?" There were other strange things I noticed, but didn't understand at the time. The way she would sometimes mutter names under her breath while doing household chores, names I didn't recognize. "Poor little Lily," she would whisper while folding laundry, or, "She was so young, so innocent." When I asked who Lily was, my mother would look startled, as if she hadn't realized she was speaking aloud. "Nobody, Elena. Just nobody you need to worry about." My brother Miguel was 2 years older than me, born in 1950 during my parents' first year of marriage. He was a beautiful child, everyone said so. He had inherited my father's broad shoulders and physical coordination, combined with my mother's fine features and light brown eyes. By the time he was 10, he was already showing promise as an athlete, excelling at baseball and football, with a natural ability that made coaches and parents take notice. Miguel was charming in the way that pretty children often are, quick with a joke or a compliment that made adults beam with pleasure. Teachers loved him, neighbors doted on him, and he had that rare quality of being genuinely liked by both children and grown-ups. If I hadn't lived with him, I might have been fooled too. But behind closed doors, Miguel was different. He had our father's temper, and our father's need to control, qualities that became more pronounced as he grew older. He would corner me when our parents weren't looking, pinching me hard enough to leave bruises in places that wouldn't show, or whispering threats about what would happen if I ever told on him for anything. "You're such a crybaby," he would hiss when I flinched away from his casual cruelty. "Papa doesn't like crybabies. Maybe he'll get rid of you if you keep acting like such a baby." The threat terrified me because I had seen my father's anger directed at others, at mechanics who made mistakes at the shop, at store clerks who moved too slowly, at other drivers who cut him off in traffic. His rage was a living thing, explosive and unpredictable, and the idea that it might be turned on me was my greatest fear. Our family attended St. Michael's Catholic Church every Sunday, sitting in the third pew from the front where my mother had sat since childhood. Father O'Brien, an elderly Irish priest with kind eyes and a gentle manner, knew our family well. He often praised my father's business success and community involvement from the pulpit, holding him up as an example of Christian values in action. Roberto Martinez. He would say during sermons about stewardship and family values, "Shows us what it means to be a man of faith in the modern world. A devoted husband and father, an honest businessman, a pillar of our community." These proclamations always made my father swell with pride, his chest expanding as he nodded graciously to the congregation. My mother would smile tightly beside him, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. I didn't understand then why these compliments seemed to cause her pain, why praise for my father's character made her look like she might be sick. But I was learning to watch faces, to read the subtle signs that adults displayed when they thought children weren't paying attention. It was a skill that would serve me well in the years to come, the ability to see past surfaces, to detect the reality that lurked beneath carefully constructed facades. Our neighborhood was typical of working-class America in the early 1960s. Houses were close together, but not crowded, each with its own small yard and garage. Children played freely in the streets, bicycles were left unlocked on front lawns, and neighbors looked out for each other's kids. It was the kind of place where everyone believed they knew everyone else's business, where secrets were supposedly impossible to keep. This belief in transparency was both comforting and dangerous. It was comforting because it created an illusion of safety. Surely nothing truly bad could happen in a place where Mrs. Henderson next door could see into our backyard, where Mr. Patterson across the street knew what time my father came home from work each night, where the mailman stopped to chat with my mother every Tuesday when the bills arrived. But it was dangerous because this illusion of openness actually provided perfect cover for the kinds of secrets that thrived on silence and shame. When everyone believes they know everything about their neighbors, they stop looking closely. They accept surface appearances as complete truth, especially when those appearances conform to their expectations of normalcy. My father understood this instinctively. He was careful to maintain his image as the perfect family man, the successful businessman, the devoted Catholic who never missed Sunday Mass. He coached Little League baseball, volunteered for church fundraisers, and was always ready with a friendly wave and a joke for anyone he encountered on the street. But late at night, when the neighbors were asleep and the windows were closed against the cold, Roberto Martinez became someone else entirely. Someone whose appetites were twisted and whose concept of family included violations that would have horrified the people who praised him every Sunday morning. The transformation was gradual, so subtle that for a long time I convinced myself I was imagining it. It started with looks that lasted too long, touches that lingered in places they shouldn't, comments about my developing body that made my skin crawl, even though I was too young to understand why. "Our little Elena is growing up so fast," he would say to my mother while his eyes traveled over my 8-year-old body in a way that made me want to hide. "Soon she'll be a real señorita, eh?" My mother's response to these comments was always the same, a quick nervous smile and an immediate change of subject, as if acknowledging what my father had said would somehow make it more real, more dangerous. I didn't know it then, but my mother was already living in terror. She knew exactly what kind of man she had married, exactly what he was capable of, because he had been demonstrating it to her since the early days of their marriage. The bruises, the threats, the carefully controlled violence that masqueraded as discipline, these were all part of a pattern that would eventually expand to include his children. But in 1963, when I was 11 years old and still believed that parents were supposed to protect their children, I had no framework for understanding what was coming. I only knew that something in our house was changing, that the safety I had once felt was eroding like riverbank soil in a spring flood. The first real warning came on a humid evening in July when the air conditioning had broken and all the windows were open to catch any hint of breeze. I was in my room supposedly sleeping when I heard my parents arguing in their bedroom down the hall. Their voices were low but intense, and the thin walls carried every word clearly to my ears. "Roberto, she's just a child." My mother was saying, her voice tight with fear. "She's not ready for that kind of attention." "I decide what my daughter is ready for." My father's voice rumbled back, and I could hear the dangerous edge that always preceded violence. "She's my blood, my flesh. I know what's best for her." "Please," my mother whispered, and I could hear her crying. "Please don't do this. Not to Elena. She's so innocent, so sweet. Don't take that away from her." "You don't tell me what I can and cannot do in my own house with my own family." My father snarled, and I heard the sound of flesh striking flesh, followed by my mother's muffled gasp. I lay in my bed, paralyzed with confusion and terror, trying to understand what they were talking about. What kind of attention? What was my father planning to do to me? And why was my mother, who was supposed to protect me, pleading instead of fighting? The next morning, my mother appeared at breakfast with a bruise on her cheek that she tried to cover with makeup. She moved carefully like someone whose body had been hurt, and she wouldn't meet my eyes across the breakfast table. "Mama, what happened to your face?" I asked innocently. Before she could answer, my father laughed a sound that sent chills down my spine because it contained no warmth, no genuine amusement. "Your mama walked into the bathroom door in the dark last night," he said, reaching over to ruffle my hair with a hand that smelled of motor oil and something else I couldn't identify. "She's always been clumsy, haven't you, Carmen?" My mother nodded quickly, still not looking at me. "Yes," she whispered. "Very clumsy." But I had heard the argument. I knew she hadn't walked into any door. And somewhere deep in my 11-year-old mind, I began to understand that my mother's clumsiness was actually my father's cruelty, carefully disguised and systematically covered up. That was the summer everything changed. That was when Roberto Martinez stopped pretending to be the man everyone thought he was, and began showing his children who he really was underneath the carefully constructed facade. And that was when I learned that monsters don't announce themselves with fangs and claws. They come disguised as the people who are supposed to love you most. The first assault happened on October 23, 1963, 3 weeks after my 11th birthday. The date is burned into my memory not just because of what occurred, but because I had been looking forward to that evening for weeks. It was the night of the annual St. Michael's Harvest Festival, and for the first time, I was old enough to help my mother work at the church bake sale booth instead of just tagging along as a child. I had spent days helping her prepare rolling out pie crusts with my small hands, carefully measuring ingredients for her famous snickerdoodle cookies, practicing how to make change and speak politely to customers. I felt so grown up, so important, wearing my best Sunday dress and the small white apron my mother had sewn, especially for the occasion. But that afternoon, my mother developed what she called one of her headaches, the kind that sent her to bed with the curtains drawn and a cold cloth over her eyes. These headaches had become more frequent over the past year, always seeming to strike at times when my father was in a particularly dark mood or when family obligations required her to interact with other people for extended periods. "I'm sorry, mija," she whispered from her darkened bedroom, her voice thin and strained. "You'll have to go with Papa and Miguel tonight. I just can't. I can't manage it today." My father was surprisingly cheerful about the change in plans. "Don't worry, Elena," he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder as we stood outside my mother's bedroom door. "We'll have our own little celebration here at home. Much better than that crowded church festival, eh?" Something in his tone made my stomach twist, but I couldn't have articulated why. At 11, I still trusted that parents meant well, even when their actions felt wrong. I was disappointed about missing the festival, but I tried to be understanding about my mother's illness. Miguel, who was 13 and had been looking forward to showing off for the older kids at the festival, was less gracious about the change in plans. "This is stupid," he muttered as our father sent him to his room after dinner. "We never get to do anything fun because Mama's always sick. Your mother works very hard taking care of this family," my father said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he agreed with Miguel's assessment. "Sometimes she needs to rest, and sometimes that means we have to find our own entertainment." After Miguel stomped upstairs to his room, my father suggested I help him clean up the dinner dishes, usually my mother's job. I was happy to help, proud to be trusted with this grown-up responsibility. We worked side by side at the kitchen sink, my father washing while I dried, chatting about school and my art projects and the new dress my mother was sewing for me. It felt normal, even pleasant. My father could be genuinely charming when he wanted to be, full of jokes and stories that made me laugh. He told me about the funny customers who came into his shop, about the time he accidentally put the wrong oil in Mrs. Patterson's car and had to spend all day fixing his mistake, about his plans to expand the business and maybe buy a bigger house. "You're such a good helper, mija," he said as I carefully dried the last plate. "So grown up for your age, much more mature than other girls your age." The compliment made me glow with pride. I was always eager for my father's approval, always hoping to be the daughter he wanted me to be. "Come on," he said, hanging up the dish towel. "Let's go sit in the living room. We can listen to some music, maybe play a game of cards." The living room was dimly lit with just one lamp casting a warm circle of light near my father's favorite armchair. He settled into the chair and patted his knee, gesturing for me to sit on his lap the way I had when I was smaller. "I'm getting too big to sit on your lap, Papa," I said, suddenly self-conscious about my changing body. "Nonsense," he said, his voice carrying that edge that meant I shouldn't argue. "You'll never be too big to spend time with your old man." I perched awkwardly on his knee, trying to hold myself stiffly so I wouldn't put too much weight on his leg. But he pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around my waist in a way that felt different from the casual hugs I was used to. "Relax, Elena," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "There's nothing wrong with a father showing affection to his daughter." His hands began to move at first in ways that could have been innocent, rubbing my back, smoothing my hair. But gradually, the touches became more invasive, more purposeful. His fingers traced patterns on my arms that made my skin crawl, lingered on my shoulders in ways that felt wrong, moved to places that I instinctively knew were private. "Papa," I whispered, trying to squirm away. "I don't like this." "Shh," he said, his grip tightening. "This is normal, mija. This is what fathers and daughters do when they love each other very much. Don't you love Papa?" "Yes, but..." "Then trust me. I would never do anything to hurt you. This is just special time. Our secret special time." The word secret sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I had been taught that good touches and bad touches were different, that adults who asked children to keep physical contact secret were usually doing something wrong. But this was my father, the man who was supposed to protect me from those dangerous strangers my teachers warned us about. I want to get down now, I said, my voice stronger, despite the fear crawling up my throat. In a minute, he said, and his hands moved to places that were definitely absolutely wrong. Just relax and let Papa show you how much he loves you. What happened next is burned into my memory in fragments. The smell of his aftershave mixed with the beer he'd had with dinner. The sound of the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. The feel of his calloused hands on my skin. The way my body seemed to freeze in place, even as my mind screamed for me to run. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. When it was over, he held me against his chest, his heart beating fast beneath my ear. He said, his voice thick and strange. That wasn't so bad, was it? That's how fathers and daughters show love in our family. But it's our special secret, Elena. Our private business. Do you understand? I nodded, though I didn't understand anything. My body felt dirty and wrong, like I had been contaminated by something I couldn't wash off. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Was this really normal? Was this really love? Why did it feel so terrible if it was supposed to be good? If you tell anyone about our special time, my father continued, his voice taking on that dangerous edge I had learned to fear, they won't understand. They'll think you're a bad girl. They might even take you away from Mama and Papa and put you in a place for bad children. You don't want that, do you? I shook my head frantically. The threat of being taken away from my family, even a family that hurt me, was more terrifying than the abuse itself. Good girl, he said, kissing the top of my head in a gesture that would have seemed loving to any outside observer. Now go upstairs and get ready for bed, and remember this is our secret. No one else needs to know about the special way Papa shows his love. I stumbled upstairs on shaking legs, my mind reeling with what had just happened. In the bathroom, I scrubbed my hands and face until they were red and raw, trying to wash away the feeling of his touch. I brushed my teeth 3 times, but I couldn't get rid of the taste of fear and disgust that filled my mouth. When I got to my room, I found Miguel waiting for me, sitting on my bed with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of excitement and something that looked almost like hunger. Did Papa give you special attention tonight? He asked, his voice casual, but his eyes intense. I stared at him, unsure how to answer. How did he know about what had just happened? It's okay. Miguel continued, standing up and moving closer to me. Papa told me all about it. He said it's time for me to help with your education too. That's what big brothers are for, to teach their little sisters about grown-up things. I don't want to learn about grown-up things, I whispered, backing toward the door, but Miguel was faster and stronger than me. He caught my wrist and pulled me back into the room, closing the door behind us with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. Don't be such a baby, he said, his grip tightening enough to hurt. This is family business, Elena. This is how our family works. Papa explained it all to me, how it's our job to teach you, how it's your job to learn. It's tradition. What tradition? What are you talking about? The Martinez family tradition, Miguel said, as if this explained everything. Papa learned from his papa, and I'm learning from Papa, and now you get to learn from both of us. It's an honor, Elena. You should be grateful. I didn't feel honored. I felt sick and scared and trapped. But I was 11 years old, and Miguel was 13 and much stronger than me, and he was saying things that sounded official and important, even though they felt completely wrong. What happened in my bedroom that night was worse than what had happened downstairs with my father, because Miguel was angry and impatient, where my father had been controlled and methodical. Miguel hurt me in ways that left marks made me cry out loud enough that I was terrified my mother would hear and come to investigate. But my mother didn't come. Whether because she was truly asleep from her medication, or because she was choosing not to hear, I will never know. All I knew was that I was alone with my brother's cruelty, just as I had been alone with my father's violation. When Miguel was finished, he leaned close to my ear and whispered the same threats my father had made, but with his own adolescent twist. "If you tell anyone about this, I'll tell them you asked for it," he hissed. "I'll tell them you begged me to teach you these things. Who do you think they'll believe, you or me?" He was right, and I knew it. Miguel was the golden child, the star athlete, the charming boy that everyone loved. I was just a quiet girl who spent too much time drawing and reading, who had no special talents or accomplishments to recommend her. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my body aching in places I didn't have words for my mind, trying to process what had happened to me. I kept thinking about what my father had said about family tradition, about how this was supposedly normal and loving. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like something had been stolen from me, something I couldn't name, but knew I would never get back. It felt like I had been broken in a way that couldn't be fixed, marked in a way that would always show, even if other people couldn't see it. I thought about telling my mother, but the memory of her lying in bed with a headache while her husband and son violated her daughter seemed to answer that question before I could even ask it. If she wasn't going to protect me when I needed her most, what was the point of telling her what had already happened? I thought about running away, but where could an 11-year-old girl go? I had no money, no relatives who might take me in, no friends whose parents would believe such terrible accusations about the respected Roberto Martinez. So I made the decision that would define the next 7 years of my life. I decided to survive. I decided to be smart, to be careful, to document everything, and wait for my chance to fight back. I was just a child, but I was going to learn to think like a strategist, to plan like a general preparing for war. Because that's what this was, I realized as I finally drifted off to sleep near dawn. This was war, and the battle lines had been drawn. My father and brother on one side, representing everything evil and violent and wrong in the world. My mother on the sidelines, choosing neutrality in a conflict where neutrality was complicity. And me on the other side, alone, but not defenseless. Because I had something they didn't have. I had the truth. And someday, somehow, I was going to use that truth to destroy them all. The weeks following that first night of abuse passed in a haze of hypervigilance and desperate hope that it had been an isolated incident. I told myself that maybe my father had been drinking more than usual, that maybe Miguel had misunderstood something, that maybe this was just a terrible nightmare that wouldn't happen again. I was wrong. The assaults became routine, predictable in their timing, if not their specific nature. My father had established what he called family education time periods, when my mother was conveniently absent or incapacitated, when the house was isolated from potential witnesses, when he and Miguel could conduct what they described as my training without interruption. These sessions followed a pattern that became grimly familiar. My father would start with gentle touches and soft words, gradually escalating to more invasive contact, while explaining that this was normal, natural, and necessary for my development as a woman. He would describe in clinical detail how this was preparing me for marriage, how I was lucky to have family members who cared enough to educate me properly. Other girls have to learn these things from strangers. He would say, his hands doing things that made my skin crawl. Dangerous men who don't care about them, who might hurt them badly. But you're learning from people who love you, people who want what's best for you. This is a gift, Elena. You should be grateful. Miguel's approach was different, more aggressive, more overtly violent. He seemed to enjoy my fear and pain in ways that my father, for all his monstrosity, did not. Where my father presented his violations as education, Miguel made no pretense about the power dynamics involved. "You're going to do what I tell you to do," he would say, pinning me down with his superior size and strength. "And you're going to like it, or at least act like you like it, because if you don't, I'll make things much worse for you." His threats were specific and terrifying. He would describe in detail what he would do to me if I resisted, how he would hurt me in ways that wouldn't show, how he would convince our parents that I was disturbed or delusional if I tried to report what was happening. The physical pain was terrible, but the psychological manipulation was worse. Both my father and brother worked systematically to convince me that I was complicit in my own abuse, that I had somehow asked for or deserved what was happening to me. "Look how your body responds," my father would say during his violations. "Your body knows this is right even if your mind is confused. Trust your body, Misha. It knows what you need." "You're not even fighting anymore," Miguel would taunt. "That means you like it. That means you want it. You're just as sick as we are." These psychological assaults were designed to erode my sense of reality, to make me question my own perceptions and judgments. They were attempting to gaslight me into accepting that their behavior was normal, that my revulsion was the aberration, that I was the problem in our family dynamic. But I was fighting back in the only way I could, by documenting everything. I had started keeping a journal immediately after the first assault, hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Little House on the Prairie that I kept on my bookshelf among other children's books. Every violation, every threat, every conversation was recorded in careful detail, written in the smallest handwriting I could manage to fit as much information as possible on each page. The process of writing about what was happening to me was both traumatic and therapeutic. It forced me to relive the worst moments of my days, but it also gave me a sense of agency, a feeling that I was doing something concrete to fight back against my abusers. October 30th, 1963. Papa came to my room after Mama took her pills. Said it was time for another lesson. Touched me under my nightgown. Said if I tell anyone, they'll think I'm a bad girl and send me away. Miguel was listening at the door. I could see his shadow. November the 3rd, 1963. Miguel cornered me in the basement while Papa was at the shop and Mama was at church committee. Made me touch him. Said, "This is what wives do for husbands, and I need to learn." Threatened to hurt my drawings if I don't cooperate. November 10th, 1963. Papa and Miguel together tonight. Papa says Miguel is old enough to help with my education. They took turns. Papa held me down while Miguel... I can't write it all. Too terrible. But I have to remember everything for when I'm old enough to make them pay. The journal became my lifeline, proof that I wasn't crazy or imagining things, evidence that what was happening to me was real and wrong and criminal. But keeping it secret required constant vigilance. I had to write in it only when I was certain I wouldn't be discovered, had to hide it carefully after each entry, had to develop elaborate cover stories in case anyone found it. The strain of maintaining this double life, the public facade of normal family relationships and the private reality of systematic abuse, began to take its toll on my schoolwork and social interactions. My grades, which had always been solid B's and A's, started slipping as my ability to concentrate deteriorated. Mrs. Anderson, my 6th grade teacher, noticed the change immediately. She was a kind woman in her 40s who had taught in Willow Creek for over 20 years and had a reputation for caring deeply about her students' well-being. "Elena," she said one day after class when the other students had gone to lunch, "I've noticed you seem distracted lately. Your homework assignments are sloppy. You're not participating in class discussions the way you used to. Is everything all right at home?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Here was an adult who cared, who was asking directly about my well-being, who might actually listen if I told her the truth. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope so intense it made my chest tight. But then I remembered my father's threats, Miguel's warnings, and the terrible isolation I would face if I spoke up and wasn't believed. Mrs. Anderson was a nice lady, but she was also a pillar of the community who had known my family for years. She had seen my father at school events, had chatted with my mother at parent-teacher conferences, had watched Miguel excel in her classroom 2 years earlier. Would she really believe that the charming, successful Roberto Martinez was sexually abusing his daughter? Would she accept that the popular, athletic Miguel Martinez was following in his father's footsteps? Or would she assume that I was troubled, confused, possibly mentally ill? Everything's fine, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I've just been having trouble sleeping lately. Mrs. Anderson studied my face for a long moment, and I could see that she didn't believe me. But she also didn't push harder, didn't ask the follow-up questions that might have broken through my defenses. Oh, well, she said finally. If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who will listen without judgment, I want you to know that I'm here. Sometimes children face problems that feel too big to handle alone, and there's no shame in asking for help. I nodded and mumbled something about appreciating her concern, but inside I was screaming with frustration. She was so close to the truth, so close to offering the help I desperately needed, but I couldn't bridge the gap between her offer and my ability to accept it. That afternoon, I went home determined to find a way to tell someone what was happening to me. I would start with my mother, I decided. Surely, despite her recent behavior, she would protect her daughter if she knew the full extent of what was happening. I found her in the kitchen preparing dinner with her usual methodical precision. She looked tired, older than her 31 years, and her hands shook slightly as she peeled potatoes. But she seemed more present than she had been in weeks, more like the mother I remembered from earlier years. Mama, I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. Can I talk to you about something important? She looked up from her work, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old warmth in her eyes. Of course, mija. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath, trying to find the words that would make her understand, without shocking her so badly that she shut down completely. It's about Papa and Miguel. They've been touching me in ways that don't feel right. The change in my mother's expression was immediate and devastating. The warmth disappeared, replaced by a cold blankness that made her look like a stranger. Her hands stopped moving, the half-peeled potato frozen in her grip. What do you mean? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. They touch me in private places. I said, the words coming out in a rush now that I had started. They make me touch them too. They say it's normal, but it doesn't feel normal. It hurts, and it makes me feel sick, and they say I can't tell anyone or something bad will happen to me. My mother set down the potato and the peeler, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked to the kitchen window and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the backyard where clotheslines held the sheets she had washed that morning. Elena, she said, finally not turning around to look at me. You must never say things like that again. Do you understand me? Never. But Mama... No. She turned around, and the expression on her face was harder than I had ever seen it. I don't want to hear such terrible lies about your father and brother. They love you. They would never hurt you. If you're having confused feelings about normal family affection, then we need to talk to Father O'Brien about getting you some guidance. They're not lies, I said, desperation making my voice rise. Mama, please, you have to believe me. Papa comes to my room at night when you're asleep. Miguel corners me when you're not home. They do things to me that hurt, things that make me feel dirty and scared. My mother's hand moved so fast, I didn't see it coming. The slap caught me across the cheek with enough force to knock me sideways in my chair. Stars exploding across my vision. I said never to speak such filth about your family. She said, her voice shaking with an emotion I couldn't identify. Your father is a good man, a godly man. He works hard to provide for this family, and he deserves respect, not wicked accusations from his own daughter. I pressed my hand to my stinging cheek, tears streaming down my face. Why won't you listen to me? Why won't you help me?" "Because there's nothing to help you with," my mother said, turning back to the window. "There's nothing happening except in your imagination. And if you keep telling these stories, people will think you're sick in the head. They'll take you away from us and put you in a place for disturbed children. Is that what you want?" "No," I whispered. "Then you'll forget about these foolish ideas and concentrate on being a good daughter. A grateful daughter who appreciates everything her family does for her." That night, as I lay in bed waiting for the inevitable sound of my father's footsteps in the hallway, I understood that I was completely and utterly alone. My mother knew what was happening to me. I was certain of that now. The way she had responded, the specific nature of her threats, the way she had refused to even consider the possibility that I might be telling the truth. It all pointed to knowledge rather than ignorance. She knew, and she was choosing to allow it to continue. She was choosing her own comfort and security over her daughter's safety. She was choosing to be complicit in my abuse rather than face the difficult reality of confronting her husband. When my father did come to my room that night, bringing Miguel with him for what they called advanced lessons, I no longer had any illusions about rescue or protection. I was on my own, and I would have to find my own way to survive and eventually to fight back. But I was learning even in the midst of my victimization. I was learning about power dynamics, about manipulation, about the ways that abusers maintain control over their victims. I was learning about the weakness of adults who should be strong, about the corruption that can exist in institutions and families that present themselves as moral and upstanding. Most importantly, I was learning that survival sometimes required patience. I was 11 years old, physically powerless, socially isolated, and legally vulnerable. But I wouldn't always be 11. I wouldn't always be powerless. And when the time came for me to strike back, I would be ready. The years between 11 and 15 were a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I didn't have those words for it at the time. What I knew was that every day was a battle for my sanity, my sense of self, and my determination to survive long enough to fight back. My father and brother had settled into a routine of abuse that followed the rhythms of our household and community life. Sunday afternoons after church and family dinner, when my mother would retreat to her bedroom with one of her increasingly frequent headaches. Wednesday evenings when my mother attended her church committee meetings. Saturday mornings when she went grocery shopping and ran errands in town. These were the times when Roberto and Miguel Martinez dropped their masks and showed me who they really were beneath the carefully constructed facades they presented to the world. The physical abuse was horrific, but they had refined their psychological manipulation to an art form. They had created an entire mythology around what they were doing to me, a twisted belief system that positioned their crimes as acts of love, education, and family tradition. "This is how Martinez women learn to be good wives," my father would say during his violations. "My mother taught my sisters this way, just like her mother taught her. It's been passed down through generations, Elena. You're part of something ancient and sacred." I knew even at 11 and 12 and 13 that this was a lie. But the consistency of their messaging, the way they both reinforced the same narrative, made it harder to maintain my grip on reality than I would have expected. Miguel had developed his own version of the family mythology, one that positioned him as my protector and teacher rather than my abuser. "I'm preparing you for the real world," he would say after forcing himself on me. "Men out there won't be as gentle as Papa and me. They won't care about your feelings or your comfort. At least we love you. At least we're family." They had also begun to involve me more actively in maintaining the family's public image. I was expected to smile and be charming at church events, to brag about my wonderful father and brother to neighbors and classmates, to provide alibis for their behavior if anyone ever asked uncomfortable questions. "Remember," my father would say before we left for Sunday Mass, "we are the perfect family. Everyone thinks so, and that's how it should stay. If anyone ever asks you about our family time, you tell them how much you love spending time with Papa and Miguel." how grateful you are for all the attention we give you. This forced complicity in my own abuse was perhaps the cruelest aspect of their control. They weren't just violating my body. They were forcing me to participate in the violation of my own truth, to become an active agent in the construction of lies that protected them and isolated me further. But I was fighting back in ways they didn't know about. My secret journal had grown from a few pages to multiple notebooks, all carefully hidden in various locations around my room and the house. I had developed a code system for the most explicit details, using symbols and abbreviations that would be meaningless to anyone who found the notebooks accidentally. I had also begun to document patterns in their behavior, noting the triggers that seemed to precipitate the worst abuse, the times and circumstances that made them most dangerous, the ways their moods and actions correlated with external events. Papa always worse after bad days at the shop, I wrote in one entry. Miguel more violent after fights with his friends or bad grades. Both of them escalate when Mama takes more pills or seems more distant. This analytical approach to my own victimization was both protective and empowering. It gave me a sense of agency in a situation where I had no real power, and it helped me develop survival strategies that sometimes allowed me to avoid the worst abuse. I learned to read the warning signs that preceded assaults, the particular way my father's jaw would clench when he was working up to hurting me, the restless energy that would overtake Miguel when he was planning to corner me somewhere. I learned to make myself scarce during high-risk times, to create plausible reasons to be away from the house or surrounded by other people. Most importantly, I learned to dissociate during the worst moments, to send my mind somewhere else while my body endured what it had to endure. I would imagine myself as a famous artist painting masterpieces in a studio filled with light and color. I would create detailed fantasies about the future college career, independence, justice. I would mentally compose the speeches I would give someday when I told the world what Roberto and Miguel Martinez had done to me. This psychological escape was crucial to my survival, but it also came with costs. My grades continued to decline as my ability to concentrate suffered. I withdrew from friendships and social activities, becoming increasingly isolated from my peers. I developed what I now know were symptoms of complex PTSD, hypervigilance, emotional numbing, difficulty sleeping, and a chronic sense of being in danger even when I was objectively safe. My teachers noticed the changes, but their responses were uniformly inadequate. Some, like Mrs. Anderson, expressed gentle concern but didn't push when I deflected their questions. Others interpreted my withdrawal and declining performance as typical adolescent problems, laziness, rebellion, or adjustment difficulties. Only one teacher came close to recognizing what might really be happening to me. Miss Rodriguez taught art at the middle school, and she had taken a special interest in my work since I started her class in 7th grade. I had always been drawn to visual arts, but trauma had intensified my need for creative expression. My drawings and paintings became increasingly dark and symbolic, filled with images of cages and shadows, and figures trapped in spaces too small to contain them. Elena. Miss Rodriguez said one day after class when I was cleaning paintbrushes at the sink, "I've been looking at your recent work, and I'm wondering if you'd like to talk about some of the themes you've been exploring." I looked up at her, water dripping from the brush in my hand. Miss Rodriguez was young, probably in her late 20s, with kind eyes and an earnest manner that made her popular with students. She was also the first adult who had ever acknowledged that my art might be trying to communicate something important. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "Well," she said, pulling out my latest painting, a watercolor of a bird trapped in a cage, so small it couldn't spread its wings. "There's a lot of imagery in your recent work that suggests feelings of confinement, powerlessness, maybe fear. The trapped animals, the dark colors, the figures that seem to be reaching for help." My heart started beating faster. This was the closest any adult had come to seeing the truth that I was trying so desperately to communicate through my art. "Sometimes," Miss Rodriguez continued, "young people use art to express feelings they can't put into words, things that might be too difficult or scary to talk about directly. If there's something going on in your life that's making you feel trapped or frightened, I want you to know that I'm here to listen." For a moment, I felt the same surge of hope I had experienced with Mrs. Anderson. Here was another caring adult, someone who was actually paying attention to what I was trying to say through my work. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe Miss Rodriguez would be the one to finally hear me and believe me. But then, I remembered what had happened when I tried to tell my mother. I remembered the slap, the threats, the way she had turned my desperate plea for help into evidence of my own sickness and ingratitude. If my own mother wouldn't protect me, why would a teacher? And what would happen to Miss Rodriguez if she tried to challenge Roberto Martinez? He was a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. She was a young woman new to the area with no social standing to speak of. I just like painting sad things sometimes, I said, turning back to the sink to hide the tears that were threatening to spill over. It's more interesting than happy pictures. Miss Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, and I could feel her studying my face in profile. Elena, she said finally, if you ever change your mind, if you ever want to talk about anything at all, you know where to find me. And if there's ever an emergency, if you ever need help right away, you can call me at home. I'm going to write my phone number on a piece of paper for you. She wrote her number on a small slip of paper and tucked it into my art folder. Promise me you'll keep that somewhere safe, just in case. I promised, though I had no intention of ever using it. But the fact that she had offered it, that she had seen something in my work that worried her enough to take that step, gave me the first glimmer of hope I had felt in months. Maybe I wasn't as invisible as I thought. Maybe when the time came to tell my story, there would be adults who would listen and believe. That night, I added a new entry to my journal. Miss R sees something in my paintings, gave me her phone number in case of emergency. First adult who seems to understand that something is wrong. Maybe there is hope for the future. Maybe someday I won't be alone in this fight. I was 15 years old, and I had been systematically abused for 4 years. But for the first time since it had all started, I began to believe that I might actually survive long enough to see justice done. I just had to be patient a little longer. The abuse continued, but my perspective on it had begun to shift. I was no longer just enduring it. I was studying it, documenting it, preparing for the day when I would use everything I had learned against the men who had used it against me. Every violation was being recorded. Every threat was being remembered. Every moment of pain was being transformed into evidence that would someday destroy them. They thought they were breaking me, but they were actually forging me into something they could never have expected, their own nemesis, patient and methodical, and absolutely determined to see them pay for every moment of suffering they had inflicted. The reckoning was coming. They just didn't know it yet. The truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family came to light on a sweltering afternoon in July 1967, 3 months after my 15th birthday. I had come home early from my summer job at the local library, where I'd been working part-time shelving books and helping with the children's reading program. The library was my refuge, quiet safe, filled with stories of people who overcame impossible circumstances and triumphed over evil. The house should have been empty. My father was supposed to be at the shop until 6, Miguel was at baseball practice, and my mother had mentioned something about visiting her sister in Harrisburg. But as I approached the front porch, I could hear voices from inside, angry, hushed voices that made me freeze with my hand on the door handle. One voice was my father's, rough with drink, despite it being only mid-afternoon. The other belonged to a woman I didn't recognize, cultured, educated, with a slight southern accent that seemed oddly familiar despite my certainty that I'd never heard it before. I crept around to the side of the house where the living room window was cracked open to catch any hint of breeze in the stifling heat. From there, I could hear every word clearly, and what I heard made my blood turn to ice. "You can't keep doing this, Roberto." The woman was saying, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "It's been 12 years since Lily died. 12 years since you promised me it would never happen again." Lily. The name hit me like a physical blow. It was the name my mother sometimes whispered when she thought no one was listening, the name that always made her cry when she said it out loud. "I don't know what you're talking about." my father replied, but there was something in his voice, a defensiveness, that I had learned to recognize as the precursor to violence. "Don't lie to me," the woman snapped. "I've been watching this house for months. I've seen the patterns, Roberto. I know the signs. That little girl, Elena, she has the same look Lily had before. Before she couldn't take it anymore." My legs nearly gave out beneath me. This stranger was talking about me, about signs I didn't even know I was showing. But more importantly, she was talking about someone named Lily, who had apparently died because of something my father had done. "Lily was weak," my father said dismissively. "She couldn't handle the responsibilities of being a Martinez woman. Elena is stronger. Lily was 8 years old when she killed herself, Roberto. 8 years old. She left a note saying she couldn't stand the special games anymore, that she would rather be dead than have you touch her one more time." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I had a sister, a half-sister, who had killed herself to escape the same abuse I was enduring. The same special games, the same violations, the same systematic destruction of a child's innocence and sense of safety. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see the woman now. She was tall and blonde, maybe in her early 40s, wearing a blue dress that looked expensive but wrinkled as if she had been traveling. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and grief, but her posture was rigid with determination. "Who are you?" I whispered to myself, though some part of me was already beginning to understand. "I should have stopped you then," the woman continued. "I should have gone to the police, should have made sure you could never hurt another child. But I was weak too. I was broken and scared, and I let them convince me that I was crazy, that Lily's death was just a tragic accident." "Why, it was an accident," my father said. "A disturbed child who couldn't tell the difference between love and something else. Just like you couldn't tell the difference between guidance and abuse." "The guidance?" The woman's voice rose dangerously. "Is that what you call it when you attack your own daughter? When you teach your son to do the same thing? When you create a cycle of abuse that destroys innocent children?" "You watch your mouth," my father snarled, and I heard the sound of footsteps moving quickly across the room. "You come into my house making accusations threatening my family." "I'm not threatening anyone," the woman said, though I could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "I'm trying to save Elena from the same fate as Lily. I'm trying to break the cycle before another little girl dies." "Elena is fine," my father said. "Elena is happy and healthy and grateful for the education her family provides. Unlike some children, she understands loyalty and discretion." "Because you've terrorized her into silence, just like you terrorized Lily. Just like you terrorized me." The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture so horrible that my mind initially rejected it. This woman was Sharon Martinez, my father's first wife, Lily's mother, a woman who was supposed to be dead, but was very much alive and standing in our living room. "I've kept quiet for 12 years. Sharon continued, her voice gaining strength. 12 years of watching you play the grieving widower, the devoted single father who found love again with sweet Carmen. 12 years of knowing that you were probably hurting your new children the same way you hurt Lily and me." "You don't know anything," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Don't I?" Sharon pulled something from her purse, a manila envelope thick with papers. "I have Lily's diary, Roberto, the one the police never saw because I was too scared to show it to them. I have medical records documenting the injuries she sustained, injuries that were explained away as accidents and clumsiness. I have photographs of bruises and cuts that tell a very different story than the one you fed to the authorities." My father's response was a roar of rage that made the windows shake. I heard the sound of furniture overturning glass, breaking Sharon's cry of alarm. "You're insane!" he shouted. "You've been in and out of mental hospitals for 12 years. Who's going to believe the word of a crazy woman against a respected businessman who's going to take seriously the ravings of someone who couldn't even protect her own daughter?" "Maybe no one," Sharon said, and I could hear her crying now. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am crazy. But Elena doesn't have to end up like Lily. She doesn't have to die to escape what you're doing to her. Elena is none of your business. She's my stepdaughter. That makes her my business. She's nothing to you. You're nothing to this family. You're a ghost, a memory, a mistake I made when I was too young to know better. The sound of the slap was sharp and clear, followed by Sharon's gasp of pain and shock. Get out. My father said, his voice deadly calm now. Get out of my house and don't come back. And if you're thinking about going to the police with your fairy tales and forged documents, remember that I know where you've been living. I know about the pills you take, the hospitals you've been in, the fake names you've been using. I know how to make you disappear, Sharon. Permanently this time. I'll find a way, Sharon said, her voice shaking but determined. I'll find proof you can't discredit. I'll save Elena even if I couldn't save Lily. You try, my father said. You just try. But remember what happened to the last person who threatened my family. The threat was unmistakable, and it hung in the air like a physical presence. I heard Sharon's footsteps moving toward the front door, heard it open and close, heard the sound of a car engine starting and fading into the distance. I remained crouched by the window for a long time after she left my mind reeling with this new information. I had a sister, a half-sister, who had been abused just like me, who had tried to escape just like I was trying to escape, but who had chosen death over continued suffering. More than that, I had concrete proof that what was happening to me was not normal, not acceptable, not something I should be grateful for. Lily's diary, medical records, photographs, all evidence that my father's crimes had been documented before, that there was a precedent for the charges I would someday bring against him. But I also understood now why my mother behaved the way she did, why she refused to acknowledge what was happening in her own house. She knew about Sharon and Lily. She had married a man who had already destroyed one family, and she was choosing to preserve her own security rather than protect her daughter from suffering the same fate. The realization filled me with a cold rage that was different from anything I had felt before. It wasn't the hot, desperate anger of a victim. It was the calculating fury of someone who finally understood the full scope of the injustice being perpetrated against her. That night, I added new entries to my journal. July 15th, 1967. Found out about Lily Martinez, my half-sister, who killed herself at age 8 because of Papa's abuse. Sharon Martinez, Papa's first wife, is alive, not dead like we were told. She has evidence. Lily's diary, medical records, photographs. Papa threatened to kill her if she goes to police. Mama knows about all of this. She married Papa knowing he had already destroyed one child. She is choosing to let him destroy me too, rather than lose her comfortable life. Now I understand why Mama takes so many pills, why she disappears when Papa and Miguel hurt me. She's not ignorant, she's complicit. She's choosing to sacrifice me to maintain her marriage to a monster. But Sharon gave me something valuable proof that I'm not crazy, that what's happening to me is criminal, that there is evidence of Papa's pattern of abuse. When I'm old enough to fight back, I won't be doing it alone. I'll be fighting for Lily too, and for all the other children Papa might hurt in the future. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I followed my father to work. I told my mother I was going to spend the day at the library, then rode my bicycle to the center of town, and positioned myself where I could watch the comings and goings at Martinez Motors without being seen. I wanted to study my father in his public persona to understand how he managed to maintain his reputation as an upstanding citizen while committing such heinous crimes in private. What I saw was a masterclass in manipulation and image management. My father was charming with customers, especially the women who brought their cars in for service. He was respectful, but not overly familiar, competent, but not condescending, friendly, but not inappropriate. He made jokes that were genuinely funny, offered fair prices for his work, and took time to explain mechanical problems in terms that non-experts could understand. He was also careful to maintain his image as a devoted family man. He had photographs of our family prominently displayed in his office, and he mentioned his wife and children frequently in conversations with customers. "My boy Miguel is starting high school this fall," I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson when she came to pick up her sedan. "Already being scouted by college baseball coaches. I tell you, that boy is going to make something of himself." "And your daughter?" Mrs. Henderson asked politely. "Elena. She's the artist of the family, always drawing and painting, very creative. She's going to be something special too, that one. I'm very proud of both my children." The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. He spoke about being proud of me while planning to violate me that very evening. He presented himself as a loving father while systematically destroying his daughter's innocence and psychological well-being. But as I watched him that day, I also began to understand something crucial about how predators operate in plain sight. They don't look like monsters to the outside world. They look like pillars of the community, devoted family men, successful business people who contribute positively to society. This understanding was both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it made clear how difficult it would be to convince people of my father's true nature. Empowering because it showed me exactly what I would need to overcome when the time came to expose him. I would need evidence so overwhelming, so undeniable, that even his sterling reputation couldn't protect him. I would need to be smarter, more prepared, and more strategic than any child should ever have to be. But I also had something my father didn't know about. I had Lily's story. I had Sharon's testimony. I had proof that this had happened before and could happen again. And someday, when I was old enough and strong enough and clever enough, I was going to use all of it to destroy him completely. The summer after discovering the truth about Lily and Sharon, I made my first serious attempt to gather concrete evidence against my father and brother. At 15, I was old enough to understand that my word alone, even supported by my detailed journals, wouldn't be enough to convince authorities to take action against Roberto Martinez, respected businessman and pillar of the community. I needed proof that couldn't be dismissed as the fantasies of a troubled teenager. The plan I developed was dangerous and required careful timing. I had managed to save enough money from my library job to buy a small tape recorder, one of those new compact models that could fit in a large pocket or bag. My idea was to record my father and brother during their assaults, capturing their threats and admissions in their own voices. The first challenge was concealing the device during the attacks. The recorder was small, but not invisible, and both my father and Miguel were paranoid about being discovered. They had developed elaborate rituals around their abuse, checking that doors were locked, ensuring that my mother was adequately sedated or absent, listening for any sounds that might indicate neighbors or visitors. I solved this problem by hiding the recorder inside a hollowed-out book, Jane Eyre. Ironically enough, a novel about another young woman trapped in a house with dangerous men. I carved out a cavity just large enough to hold the device, then practiced positioning the book at various angles to capture clear audio. The second challenge was my own terror. The thought of actively documenting my abuse, of listening to my own violations being recorded, was almost unbearable. But I forced myself to think of Lily, of the diary Sharon had mentioned, of all the evidence that might have saved my half-sister if someone had been brave enough to use it. My first attempt was a disaster. I had positioned the book carefully on my nightstand, angled toward the bed where I knew the assault would take place. The recorder was running hidden inside the carved-out pages. But when my father entered my room that night, bringing Miguel with him for what they called advanced training, my fear overwhelmed my planning. I was shaking so badly that I knocked the book off the nightstand, sending it tumbling to the floor with a loud thud. Both my father and Miguel froze, their attention immediately focused on the fallen book. "What was that?" Miguel demanded, moving toward the nightstand. "Just a book," I said quickly, but my voice was high and strained with panic. "I must have bumped it." My father's eyes narrowed with suspicion. He had survived as a predator for years by being alert to anything unusual, anything that might threaten his security. The fallen book, my obvious nervousness, the way I was positioned protectively near the nightstand, it all added up to something that didn't feel right to him. "Pick it up," he ordered. I bent to retrieve the book, praying that the recorder inside wouldn't shift or make noise. The device seemed impossibly heavy in my hands as I placed it back on the nightstand, trying to angle it naturally without being obvious about the positioning. "What book is it?" Miguel asked, reaching for it. "Jane Eyre," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "For English class." Miguel flipped through the pages casually, and I held my breath, certain he would discover the hollow interior. But the cavity I had carved was deep enough that the remaining pages formed a convincing barrier, and Miguel's inspection was cursory. "Boring," he said, tossing the book back onto the nightstand. "No wonder you can't sleep." That night's assault proceeded as usual, but I was too rattled to achieve my objective. The recorder captured nothing but muffled sounds and my own terrified breathing. Worse, I had attracted their suspicion, making future attempts more dangerous. Over the following weeks, I refined my technique. I practiced positioning the book more naturally, learned to control my body language to avoid telegraphing my nervousness, and developed cover stories for any unusual behavior they might notice. My second attempt was more successful. I managed to record 15 minutes of my father's assault, including his whispered threats about what would happen if I ever told anyone about our special family time. The audio quality wasn't perfect. Voices were muffled, and some parts were difficult to understand, but it was recognizable evidence of criminal behavior. But when I tried to play the recording back the next day, the tape had somehow been damaged. Whether through my own inexperience with the technology or some problem with the device itself, the recording was nothing but static and garbled sounds. I was devastated. Weeks of planning, the terror of actively documenting my own abuse, the risk of discovery, all of it had been for nothing. My third attempt nearly got me killed. I had become overconfident, perhaps, or simply desperate to gather the evidence I needed. When my father came to my room that October night, I was ready with the recorder positioned and running. I had even worked out how to change the tape if the assault went on long enough to fill the first side. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. My father was being particularly verbose that night, explaining in detail how my training was preparing me for adult relationships, how grateful I should be for his careful attention to my sexual education. His words were clear and damning, exactly the kind of evidence I needed. But then Miguel, who was supposed to be waiting his turn, noticed something that made him suspicious. "Papa," he said quietly, interrupting my father's monologue. "Look at how she's positioned. Look at the way she keeps glancing at that book." My blood turned to ice. In my concentration on the recording, I had been unconsciously monitoring the book's position, making sure it remained angled toward the bed. Miguel, now 17 and cunning in his own right, had noticed my divided attention. My father followed Miguel's gaze to the nightstand, and I saw the moment when suspicion crystallized into certainty in his eyes. "Elena," he said, his voice deadly calm. "What's in the book?" "Nothing," I whispered, but we all knew it was too late for lies. Miguel grabbed the book and began flipping through it more carefully than he had months earlier. This time, he found the hollow interior and the recorder nestled inside. The explosion of violence that followed was unlike anything I had experienced before. My father's rage was primal, volcanic, completely uncontrolled. He screamed at me in Spanish and English, calling me names I had never heard before, accusing me of betrayal and conspiracy and crimes against the family. Miguel's reaction was different, but equally terrifying. He seemed almost pleased by the discovery, as if catching me in deception justified everything he had done to me. "Look what our little sister has been up to," he said, holding up the recorder like a trophy. "Recording family conversations, gathering evidence. I think Elena has been planning to cause trouble for us, Papa." The beating that followed was savage. Both my father and Miguel took turns hitting me with their fists, their belts, anything they could grab. They were careful to avoid my face and other visible areas, but the rest of my body absorbed punishment that left me barely conscious. But the physical violence was nothing compared to the psychological torture that came next. You want to record our family time?" My father snarled, pressing the recorder close to my ear. "Then let's give you something worth recording." What they did to me that night, while the tape ran and captured every sound, was designed not just to hurt me, but to create evidence of my own supposed complicity. They forced me to say things, to participate in ways that would make any recording sound like consensual activity rather than rape. "Tell the tape how much you enjoy our special time." My father ordered his hand around my throat. "Tell it how you asked for these lessons, how grateful you are for our attention." When I refused, the violence escalated until I was barely conscious. When I finally said what they demanded, they made sure the recorder captured every forced word of gratitude and fake enthusiasm. By the time they were finished with me, the tape contained what sounded like a disturbed teenager engaging in voluntary sexual activity with family members. Any legitimate evidence of abuse had been buried under layers of coerced statements that would destroy my credibility if the recording ever became public. They took the tape with them when they left, along with my recorder and my dreams of gathering audio evidence of their crimes. But they had made a crucial mistake in their fury. They had confirmed everything I suspected about their methods and their vulnerabilities. The elaborate setup they had created to discredit me showed how terrified they were of being exposed, how much effort they put into protecting themselves from discovery. More importantly, their reaction proved that they knew what they were doing was criminal. If their behavior had truly been normal family interaction, as they always claimed, they wouldn't have been so desperate to prevent it from being recorded. As I lay in bed that night, my body aching from the beating, I realized that this failed attempt had actually taught me valuable lessons about my enemies. They were paranoid violent when threatened, and willing to go to extraordinary lengths to protect their secrets. But they were also afraid, deeply fundamentally afraid of being exposed. And fear, I was beginning to understand, could be weaponized. I wouldn't make the same mistakes again. My next attempt to gather evidence would be more sophisticated, more careful, and absolutely foolproof, because I was running out of time. I was 15 years old, and every day I remained in that house was another day closer to the complete destruction of my sanity and soul. I had to escape, or I had to fight back, or I was going to end up like Lily, choosing death over continued suffering. The choice was becoming clearer with each passing day: find a way to destroy them or be destroyed myself. The final confrontation began on February 14th, 1968, Valentine's Day. A cruel irony that wasn't lost on me as I put my carefully crafted plan into motion. I was 16 years old, and I had spent the past 6 months since the recording disaster developing a strategy that would either free me from my tormentors forever or get me killed in the attempt. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and multiple moving parts. Unlike my previous attempts to gather evidence, this wasn't about documentation. It was about creating a situation where the truth would be exposed in a way that couldn't be covered up, denied, or explained away. First, I had to ensure that my mother would be present and conscious during the assault. For years, she had protected herself through strategic absence and chemical oblivion, but I needed her to witness what was happening and be forced to make a choice: protect her daughter or protect her secrets. I had been carefully monitoring her pill consumption for months, learning the patterns of her self-medication. She took sleeping pills every night, anxiety medication during the day, and stronger sedatives whenever family stress became too much to bear. By gradually replacing some of her pills with placebos I had crafted from aspirin and flour, I ensured she would be alert when I needed her to be. Second, I had to create a situation that would bring outside witnesses to our house at exactly the right moment. This required manipulating multiple people without any of them realizing they were being manipulated. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, had always been concerned about the noise levels from our house. She had mentioned to my mother several times that she sometimes heard concerning sounds, late at night, crying, shouting, strange, thumping noises. I had been deliberately louder during recent assaults, making sure she would be primed to react if she heard something truly alarming. Officer Patrick Kelly was a young policeman who had recently been assigned to patrol our neighborhood. He was idealistic, thorough, and genuinely concerned about protecting citizens. I had made a point of chatting with him several times when I saw him on the street, mentioning casually that I sometimes worried about break-ins because our house was isolated and we often heard strange noises at night. Father McGrath, the assistant pastor at St. Michael's, had recently given a sermon about the church's duty to protect children and families. He had spoken passionately about recognizing signs of trouble and taking action when necessary. I had approached him after Mass to ask about his thoughts on family problems, planting seeds of concern, without making specific accusations. The final piece of my plan was the most dangerous. I had to provoke my father and Miguel into their most violent, uncontrollable rage at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, with exactly the right witnesses present. On Valentine's Day evening, my father returned from the shop in an especially foul mood. A major customer had canceled a large contract taking their business to the new garage across town. He had been drinking throughout the afternoon, and by dinner time, he was in the volatile state that always preceded the worst abuse. My mother, less sedated than usual, thanks to my pill substitution, was more present and anxious than she had been in months. She kept glancing nervously at my father, clearly recognizing the signs of impending violence, but unsure how to respond without her usual chemical buffer. Miguel, now 18 and preparing to graduate high school, had his own reasons for being agitated. He had been rejected by 3 colleges, his girlfriend had broken up with him, and he was facing the prospect of remaining in Willow Creek, while his friends went off to pursue their dreams. The family dinner was tense, filled with the kind of electrical charge that precedes thunderstorms. Every small irritation, spilled water, overcooked meat, casual conversation seemed magnified into potential triggers for explosion. I waited until exactly 8:30 p.m. when I knew Mrs. Henderson would be doing her nightly check of her house's security, when Officer Kelly would be beginning his evening patrol, when Father McGrath would be finishing his evening prayers at the church. Then I lit the fuse. "I've been thinking about something," I said, my voice carefully casual as we cleared the dinner dishes. "I ran into Sharon Martinez in town last week." The effect was immediate and electric. My father dropped the plate he was carrying, sending it crashing to the kitchen floor. My mother went completely white, her hands beginning to shake visibly. Miguel's head snapped toward me with predatory alertness. "What did you say?" my father asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Sharon Martinez." I repeated, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in years. "Your first wife, Lily's mother. She told me some very interesting things about our family history." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of my mother's increasingly rapid breathing. "You're lying," Miguel said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Am I? I pulled a manila envelope from my school bag, one I had prepared months ago, filled with photocopied pages from library books about child abuse, newspaper clippings, about family violence, and my own carefully crafted evidence designed to look like official documents. I had never actually contacted Sharon Martinez. I had no idea if she was still alive or where she might be living. But my father and Miguel didn't know that, and the mere mention of her name had shattered their carefully maintained composure. "Wait, where did you get that?" my father demanded, lunging toward me. I stepped back, keeping the envelope out of his reach. "Sharon gave it to me. Lily's diary, medical records, photographs. Everything she should have given to the police 12 years ago." "You lying little bitch!" my father snarled, his mask of civility finally slipping completely. "Sharon Martinez is dead. She died in a car accident. There is no diary, no evidence, no proof of anything." Then why are you so upset?" I asked. "If there's nothing to hide, if our family is as normal and loving as you always claim, then what difference would it make if Sharon were alive? What difference would Lily's diary make?" My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. She was staring at the envelope in my hands as if it contained a bomb. "Hannah," she whispered, "what have you done?" "I've told the truth," I said. Finally. After 6 years of keeping your secrets, of protecting your reputation, of letting you destroy me piece by piece, I've decided to tell the truth." My father's face was purple with rage. "You ungrateful little whore. After everything we've done for you, everything we've taught you, this is how you repay us, with lies and betrayal." What have you taught me?" I shouted back, my own fury finally breaking free after years of careful control. "You've taught me that fathers attack their daughters. You've taught me that brothers are supposed to violate their sisters. You've taught me that mothers are supposed to look the other way while their children are destroyed." The words hung in the air like physical objects, truth spoken aloud for the first time in our house. Miguel moved first, crossing the kitchen in 2 quick strides to grab my wrist. "Shut up," he hissed. "Shut up right now before you ruin everything." "Ruin what?" I yanked my arm free, adrenaline giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. "Your perfect family image, your reputation as the golden boy. What exactly do you think you have left to ruin?" "I have a future," Miguel snarled. "I have plans, opportunities, a life ahead of me. I'm not going to let a crazy little slut destroy everything I've worked for." A crazy little slut. I laughed, and the sound was harsh and bitter. "Is that what you call rape victims in your world? Is that how you justify what you've done to me?" My father had been gathering himself during this exchange, his drunken rage crystallizing into cold, calculated violence. When he struck, it was with the precision of someone who had been hurting people for decades. The blow caught me across the face with enough force to send me crashing into the kitchen counter. Stars exploded across my vision, and I tasted blood where my teeth had cut my lip. "That's enough," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You want to play with adult consequences, Elena? Then let's see how you handle adult punishment." Miguel locked the doors. "Roberto, no." My mother pleaded, but her voice was weak, ineffectual. "Please, she's just confused. She doesn't understand." "She understands perfectly," my father said, advancing on me where I crouched against the counter. "She understands that she's trying to destroy her family with lies and slander. She understands that she's being an ungrateful, treacherous little bitch who needs to be taught a lesson she'll never forget." This was the moment I had been waiting for, when their masks would come off completely, when their true nature would be revealed in ways that couldn't be explained away or covered up. I began screaming, not the quiet whimpering they were used to, not the muffled sobs I had trained myself to produce during their previous assaults. This was a full-throated primal scream of terror and rage that could be heard through the thin walls of our house and out into the neighborhood beyond. "Help me!" I shrieked, making my voice carry as far as possible. "Someone help me! They're going to kill me!" My father's face went white as he realized what I was doing. "Shut her up!" he barked at Miguel. "Now!" But it was too late. Mrs. Henderson's porch light had already come on next door. I could see Officer Kelly's patrol car turning onto our street, drawn by the sounds of disturbance. Father McGrath's car was pulling into our driveway. I had called him earlier, asking if he could stop by to discuss some spiritual concerns I was having. My father and Miguel looked around wildly, suddenly aware that their private violence was about to become very public. They had perhaps 30 seconds before multiple witnesses would be at our door, demanding explanations for the screaming they had heard. "If anyone comes to this door," my father said, grabbing me by the throat, "you tell them everything is fine. You tell them it was the television, a movie, anything but the truth. Because if you don't, I will kill you. Not hurt you, not threaten you. I will actually kill you, and I will make it look like an accident." And then what?" I gasped through his grip on my throat. "How do you explain Sharon's evidence? How do you explain Lily's diary? How do you cover up 12 years of child abuse when there are witnesses and documents and proof?" The doorbell rang. My father's grip on my throat tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might actually follow through on his threat to kill me. His eyes were wild, desperate, the look of a cornered animal that would do anything to escape. But then Mrs. Henderson's voice came through the door, loud and authoritative. "Roberto Carmen, we heard screaming. Is everyone all right in there?" Officer Kelly's voice joined hers. "This is the police. Please open the door." My father released my throat and stepped back, his face cycling through a dozen different expressions as he tried to calculate his options. Miguel stood frozen by the kitchen table, looking younger than his 18 years. My mother was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth, as if she could somehow hold back the truth that was about to spill out. I walked to the front door and opened it. Mrs. Henderson, Officer Kelly, and Father McGrath stood on our porch, their faces showing various degrees of concern and confusion. Behind them, I could see neighbors emerging from their houses drawn by the commotion. "Elena," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "we heard screaming. Are you all right, dear?" I looked back at my father and Miguel, standing in the kitchen doorway like statues. I looked at my mother still frozen at the table, with tears streaming down her face. Then I looked at the manila envelope in my hands, my prop, my fake evidence, my bluff that had somehow worked perfectly. "No," I said simply. "I'm not all right, and I need to tell you why." What followed was the most difficult conversation of my life, but also the most liberating. Standing on my own front porch, surrounded by caring adults who were finally ready to listen, I told the truth about what Roberto and Miguel Martinez had been doing to me for 6 years. I told them about the special games and the family traditions. I told them about the threats and the violence and the systematic destruction of my childhood. I told them about Lily Martinez, the half-sister I had never met who had killed herself rather than endure another day of abuse. I told them about my mother's willing blindness, her choice to protect her marriage rather than her daughter. And as I spoke, I watched my father's carefully constructed world collapse around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. Officer Kelly arrested both my father and Miguel. That night, charges ranging from sexual assault to child abuse to making terroristic threats. My mother was taken to the hospital for psychological evaluation after suffering what appeared to be a complete nervous breakdown. But the most important thing that happened was this: people believed me. Not because of any evidence I had manufactured, not because of Sharon Martinez's phantom testimony, not because of Lily's diary that I had never actually seen. They believed me because the truth, when finally spoken aloud after years of silence, has a power that can't be denied or explained away. The truth had set me free. Now it was time to make sure it would destroy the men who had tried to destroy me. The weeks following my father and Miguel's arrest passed in a blur of police interviews, medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and legal consultations. The small-town scandal machine kicked into high gear with reporters from 3 counties, descending on Willow Creek to cover the story of the respected businessman and his son, charged with horrific crimes against their own family member. I was both protected and exposed by the media attention. Pennsylvania law required that my identity be kept confidential as a minor victim, but in a town of 4,000 people, everyone knew who I was, regardless of what the newspapers printed. The attention was overwhelming, but it also served a crucial purpose. It made my story impossible to bury or discredit. The first major breakthrough came when Sharon Martinez contacted the police after seeing news coverage of the arrests. She was alive, living in Philadelphia under her real name, working as a secretary for a law firm. The years since Lily's death had been difficult. She had indeed spent time in psychiatric facilities, had struggled with depression, and substance abuse, had built and lost multiple identities in her attempts to escape the trauma of her first marriage. But she had kept Lily's diary, the medical records, and the photographs, just as she had told my father during their confrontation months earlier. More importantly, she had been documenting his crimes for years, hiring private investigators, when she could afford them, building a case that she had never been brave enough to pursue. "I thought about going to the police 1,000 times, she told me during our first meeting at the district attorney's office. But I was so broken, so damaged by what Roberto had done to me and Lily. I couldn't face the possibility that they wouldn't believe me, that he would find a way to make me look crazy or vindictive. She was a small woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held decades of pain. But there was also a strength in her that had been forged in the same fires that had nearly destroyed her. When I saw the news about your arrest, she continued, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. Maybe it was too late to save Lily, but it wasn't too late to help you get justice. Sharon's evidence was devastating to my father's defense. Lily's diary detailed years of sexual abuse that followed exactly the same patterns I had described. The medical records showed a history of injuries that couldn't be explained by childhood accidents. The photographs captured bruises and trauma that told a story of systematic violence. Most damaging of all was a recording Sharon had made of her final conversation with my father, the confrontation I had witnessed through the living room window. She had been wearing a wire recording his threats and his implicit admissions of guilt. The recording captured my father saying things that destroyed any possibility of claiming innocence. Lily was weak. She couldn't handle the responsibilities of being a Martinez woman. Elena is stronger. Elena is fine. Elena is happy and healthy and grateful for the education her family provides. You don't know what my daughter is ready for. I decide what's best for her. With Sharon's evidence supporting my testimony, the prosecution's case became overwhelming. My father's expensive defense attorney, paid for by mortgaging the house and the auto shop, tried every strategy he could think of. He attempted to discredit Sharon as a mentally unstable woman seeking revenge against her ex-husband. He suggested that I was a troubled teenager acting out against normal parental discipline. He even tried to argue that the abuse, if it had occurred, was the result of mental illness rather than criminal intent. None of it worked. The evidence was too compelling, the pattern too clear, the testimony too consistent. The trial began in October 1968, 8 months after the arrests. I was 17 by then, old enough to testify on my own behalf, but still young enough to be protected by victim advocacy procedures that were just beginning to be implemented in Pennsylvania courts. Testifying was the hardest thing I had ever done, but also the most empowering. For 6 years, I had been forced to keep my father and Miguel's secrets, to participate in maintaining the fiction of our perfect family. Now, finally, I was able to tell the truth in a forum where it mattered, where it would have consequences, where it would be officially recorded and preserved. I described the first assault in detail, the escalation of violence over the years, the psychological manipulation they had used to maintain control over me. I explained how they had threatened me, how they had convinced me that no one would believe me, how they had created an environment where speaking up seemed more dangerous than remaining silent. I also testified about the impact their crimes had had on my development, my education, my ability to form relationships and trust other people. The prosecutors wanted the jury to understand that this wasn't just about physical acts of violence. It was about the systematic destruction of a child's psyche. Miguel's testimony in his own defense was a disaster. His attorney had probably advised him to show remorse, to accept responsibility, while arguing for leniency based on his youth. Instead, Miguel continued to maintain that I had been a willing participant in everything that had happened. She never said no. He told the jury, his voice defiant and unrepentant. She never fought back. She understood that this was how our family worked, how we showed love for each other. If she had really been hurt or traumatized, why didn't she tell anyone? Why did she wait so long to make these accusations? The answer to those questions had been extensively covered during earlier testimony, but Miguel's inability to understand the dynamics of abuse actually helped the prosecution's case. His lack of empathy, his continued attempts to blame me for my own victimization, demonstrated exactly the kind of predatory mindset that had made the abuse possible. My father chose not to testify, probably on the advice of his attorney. But his silence spoke volumes to the jury, especially when contrasted with the extensive evidence against him. The verdict came back after just 4 hours of deliberation: guilty on all counts. My father was sentenced to 25 years in prison for multiple counts of child sexual abuse, aggravated assault, and making terroristic threats. At 55 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Miguel, despite being tried as an adult, received a lighter sentence of 12 years due to his age and his status as a victim of his father's influence. The judge made it clear that this leniency came with conditions mandatory, psychological treatment, no contact with me or any other family members, and strict supervision upon his eventual release. But the most satisfying verdict was the one that came down on my mother. Carmen Martinez was charged as an accessory after the fact and with failure to report child abuse. The prosecution argued that she had knowingly allowed the abuse to continue, that she had actively participated in covering it up, and that her willful blindness had enabled years of additional trauma. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was as much a victim as I was, that she had been too terrorized by her husband to take action. But the evidence showed otherwise. Phone records revealed that she had never called police, child services, or any other authority that might have helped me. Medical records showed that she had never brought me to a doctor for any of the injuries I had sustained during assaults. Most damning was testimony from neighbors and friends who had noticed signs of abuse but had been discouraged from pursuing their concerns by my mother's reassurances that everything was fine. Mrs. Henderson testified that she had approached my mother several times about the disturbing noises she heard from our house at night. Carmen always had an explanation, Mrs. Henderson told the court. Elena was having nightmares, she said, or the boys were playing too rough, or someone had left the television on too loud. She seemed so concerned, so caring, that I believed her. I trusted that she would protect her own daughter. My mother received a sentence of 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3 years if she completed a comprehensive treatment program for enablers of family violence. The sentences felt like justice, but they also felt inadequate. No amount of prison time could give me back my childhood, could undo the psychological damage that had been inflicted, could erase the trauma that would follow me for the rest of my life. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching the carefully constructed facade of the Martinez family crumble in the harsh light of legal scrutiny. The man who had presented himself as a pillar of the community was revealed as a predator. The golden boy athlete was exposed as a violent criminal. The suffering mother was shown to be a willing accomplice to child abuse. The truth, as I had always believed it would be, was more powerful than any lie they could construct to protect themselves. In the months that followed the trial, I began the long process of rebuilding my life. I finished high school through a combination of tutoring and correspondence courses, earning my diploma despite the disruption of the legal proceedings. I also began serious psychological therapy, working with a specialist in childhood trauma who helped me understand that what had happened to me was not my fault, that my survival was not something to feel guilty about, that I had been extraordinarily brave to fight back against impossible odds. The house on Elm Street was sold to pay legal fees and provide restitution to cover my medical and psychological treatment. I was glad to see it go. The new owners tore it down and built something completely different in its place, a bright modern home with large windows and open spaces, nothing like the dark, secretive house where so much horror had taken place. I lived with a foster family for my final year of high school, good people who asked no questions about my past and simply provided the stability I needed to move forward. They helped me apply to colleges, navigate the scholarship process, and plan for a future that had once seemed impossible. On my 18th birthday, I received an unexpected visitor, Sharon Martinez, carrying a small, wrapped package and a shy smile. "I thought you might want this," she said, handing me the package. Inside was Lily's diary, the real one, not the phantom evidence I had used to bluff my way to justice. It was small and pink, with a tiny lock that had long ago been broken. "I thought about keeping it," Sharon said. "But I realized it belongs with you now. You're the one who finally got justice for her. You're the one who made sure her death meant something." I read the diary that night, crying over the words of the little girl I had never met, but who felt like a sister in every way that mattered. Her story was so similar to mine, the same predator, the same methods, the same devastating impact on a child's psyche. But there was one crucial difference. Lily had died, believing she was alone, believing that no one would ever understand or believe her story. I had survived long enough to tell the truth, to fight back, to ensure that our father would never hurt another child. In her final entry written just days before her death, Lily had written, "I hope someday there will be a little girl braver than me, stronger than me, who will make Papa stop hurting children. I hope she will be able to do what I couldn't do. I hope she will save everyone I couldn't save." Reading those words, I understood that everything I had endured had served a purpose larger than my own survival. I had been that little girl Lily had hoped for, the one who was brave enough, strong enough, determined enough to break the cycle of abuse that had defined our family for generations. The knowledge filled me with a sense of completion that I hadn't expected. Justice had been served, truth had been told, and the future was mine to create however I chose. I was 18 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Today, as I stand in this empty lot where my childhood home once stood, I am 35 years old. 20 years have passed since the trials that sent my father and brother to prison, and I have built a life that would have been unimaginable to the terrified child who once lived in fear within these walls. I earned my bachelor's degree in psychology from Penn State, graduating summa cum laude despite the challenges of managing my trauma while pursuing my education. Graduate school followed a master's degree in clinical psychology, then a doctorate with a specialization in childhood trauma and family violence. For the past 12 years, I have worked as a therapist and advocate for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. My practice focuses on helping young people find their voices, develop coping strategies, and rebuild their lives after devastating betrayals by the adults who were supposed to protect them. The work is difficult, often heartbreaking, but profoundly meaningful. Each child I help feels like a small victory for Lily, whose death was the catalyst for my own journey toward justice and healing. I married David, a fellow psychologist, when I was 28. He knows my story, all of it, and has never made me feel damaged or diminished because of what I survived. Our relationship is built on trust, communication, and the kind of genuine intimacy that I never thought would be possible for someone with my history. We have 2 children, Lily named for the sister I never met, and Michael named not for my brother, but for the archangel who is said to protect the innocent. Both are happy, healthy, well-adjusted children who will never know the kind of fear and violation that defined my early years. Sharon Martinez became like a second mother to me, filling some of the void left by Carmen's betrayal. She lived long enough to see me graduate from college, to attend my wedding, to hold my first child in her arms. When she died of cancer 5 years ago, she left me a letter expressing her pride in the woman I had become and her gratitude that I had succeeded where she had failed in stopping Roberto Martinez from hurting any more children. My mother was released from prison after serving 3 years of her sentence. She moved to Florida, where she worked as a housekeeper until her death from a heart attack in 1985. We never spoke again after the trial. I felt no anger toward her by then, but also no desire to rebuild a relationship with someone who had chosen her own comfort over her daughter's safety. Miguel was released in 1980 after serving his full 12-year sentence. He contacted me once about 10 years ago through a letter forwarded by my old foster family. The letter was full of apologies and expressions of remorse, requests for forgiveness, and hopes for reconciliation. I never responded. Not because I was angry, by then I had worked through most of my rage through therapy and time, but because I felt nothing for him at all. He had been erased from my emotional landscape as completely as if he had never existed. Roberto Martinez died in prison in 1987, 19 years into his 25-year sentence. He was killed by another inmate, a man whose own daughter had been sexually abused, who decided that child molesters deserved their own form of justice. I felt neither satisfaction nor sadness at the news of his death. By then, he had been reduced in my mind from a terrifying monster to simply a pathetic man who had chosen to hurt children because he was too weak and damaged to build anything positive in his own life. But the most significant development in my life, the one that brings me back to this empty lot today, happened just 3 months ago when I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about the impact of my decisions. The caller was Detective Maria Santos from the Pennsylvania State Police Cold Case Unit. She was working on a series of related investigations that had been triggered by my father's conviction 20 years earlier. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "I hope you don't mind me calling you directly, but I wanted you to know about something that I think you'll find meaningful." She went on to explain that my father's conviction had created what she called a ripple effect that had continued to generate results long after I thought the case was closed. In the years following the trial, 6 other women ranging in age from 30 to 55 had come forward with allegations of sexual abuse by Roberto Martinez. These women had been children when my father abused them, victims from the years before he married my mother during his first marriage to Sharon, and even during the early years of his second marriage. They had remained silent for decades, convinced that no one would believe them, terrified of the social and legal consequences of accusing a respected member of the community. But my public testimony, the extensive media coverage of the trial, and the validation provided by my father's conviction had given them the courage to finally tell their own stories. "Your case opened the floodgates," Detective Santos explained. "These women had been carrying their secrets for 20, 30, even 40 years. Seeing you stand up in court and be believed, it showed them that justice was possible, that they weren't alone, that their stories mattered." The additional testimony had led to further investigations, which had uncovered evidence of a network of child abusers operating in our area during the 1950s and 1960s. My father had been part of a group of men who shared information, traded victims, and protected each other from suspicion and prosecution. 3 of these men were still alive and were subsequently prosecuted based on evidence that had been preserved for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to break the conspiracy of silence that had protected them. But Detective Santos had even more surprising news. "There's something else," she said. "Something I think you need to know about your impact on current cases." She explained that my work as a therapist, combined with my willingness to speak publicly about my experiences, had inspired dozens of other survivors to come forward over the years. My published papers on childhood trauma, my presentations at professional conferences, and my advocacy work had created a network of support and resources that hadn't existed when I was a child. "We've documented at least 47 cases where survivors specifically cited your story as the reason they finally felt strong enough to report their abuse," Detective Santos said. "That's 47 children and adults who found their voices because you found yours first." The number was staggering. I had always hoped that my work would help other survivors, but I had never imagined that the ripple effects would be so extensive, so long-lasting. But Detective Santos wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said. "Something that I think will be the most meaningful of all." She told me about a case from just last year, a 10-year-old girl named Emma, who had been systematically abused by her stepfather and older stepbrother. The abuse had been going on for 3 years, following patterns that were eerily similar to what I had experienced. Emma's mother, like mine, had been willfully blind to what was happening in her own home. The child had tried to tell teachers, counselors, and other family members, but her stepfather was a respected figure in their community, a successful businessman active in their church known for his charitable work. No one believed Emma. Everyone assumed she was confused, jealous of her mother's new marriage, possibly acting out for attention. But Emma's school counselor was a woman named Janet Morrison, who had attended one of my presentations about recognizing signs of childhood sexual abuse. When Emma's behavior began to match the patterns I had described, Janet Morrison knew exactly what she was looking at. Instead of dismissing Emma's allegations, she followed the protocols I had helped develop for handling such cases. She documented everything, carefully involved law enforcement from the beginning, and ensured that Emma had access to proper medical and psychological care. The stepfather and stepbrother were arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. Emma was removed from the dangerous situation, and placed with relatives who supported and believed her. She was receiving therapy and had shown remarkable resilience in her recovery. "Whoa, that little girl is alive and safe today because of the work you've done," Detective Santos said. "Because you survived, because you fought back, because you dedicated your life to protecting other children, Emma won't end up like your sister Lily." The conversation left me emotionally overwhelmed, but profoundly grateful. The scared, violated child I had once been had somehow managed to create a legacy of protection and healing that extended far beyond anything I had ever dreamed possible. Standing in this empty lot now, I can see the ghost outlines of where our house once stood. The kitchen, where my mother chose silence over protection. The living room, where my father dropped his mask of respectability. The bedroom, where I learned that survival sometimes requires unimaginable courage. But I can also see something else, the invisible network of support and justice that has grown from the seeds of my decision to fight back rather than give up. Every child who has been believed because someone learned to recognize the signs I helped identify. Every survivor who found the strength to speak because they knew they wouldn't be alone. Every predator who was stopped before he could create another Lily. This is what revenge looks like when it's channeled into justice, not a single act of retribution, but a lifetime commitment to ensuring that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. As I prepare to leave this place for the final time, I pull out a letter that arrived just yesterday, another piece of correspondence that demonstrates the ongoing impact of choices made decades ago. The letter is from Emma, the 10-year-old girl whose case Detective Santos had described. Her aunt had helped her find my address so she could write to me directly. The letter is written in careful, childish handwriting. "Dear Dr. Hayes, my aunt told me about you and how you helped make it so people would believe me when I told them about my stepdad and stepbrother. She said you were hurt like me when you were little, but you grew up to help other kids. I wanted to say thank you. I know it was probably scary to tell people what happened to you, but I'm glad you did because it helped me too. I'm going to be okay now. I live with my aunt and uncle, and they're really nice. I'm seeing a counselor who is helping me not be scared anymore. I want to be like you when I grow up, someone who helps kids who are hurt. Thank you for being brave so I could be brave too. Love, Emma. P.S. My aunt said to tell you that your sister Lily would be proud of you." Reading these words, I understand that the cycle of abuse that defined my family for generations has finally truly been broken. Not just for me, not just for my own children, but for countless other children whose names I will never know, whose faces I will never see, whose lives have been touched by the decision I made as a terrified teenager to fight back instead of giving up. Lily's death was not meaningless. My suffering was not without purpose. The courage it took to speak truth to power, to stand up against seemingly impossible odds, to refuse to let evil triumph through silence, all of it has been transformed into something larger and more powerful than any individual act of revenge could ever be. As I walk away from this empty lot for the final time, I carry with me not the weight of what was done to me here, but the knowledge of what I was able to do because of it. Some stories end with the defeat of the villain. Some end with the rescue of the victim. This story ends with something rarer and more precious, the transformation of trauma into triumph of suffering, into service of one person's refusal to remain silent, into a chorus of voices that will never be silenced again. That is my revenge. That is my justice. That is my gift to the sister I never met and the children I will never meet but have somehow managed to protect. The scared little girl with the secret diary has become exactly who she was meant to be, a guardian, a healer, and a voice for those who are still learning to find their own.